Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Social murder, austerity, and life expectancy in the UK is a study by David Walsh and Jeremy McCartney looking at the combining robust evidence with real life stories, giving us the shocking impact in the UK of austerity policies on life expectancy, but hopefully giving us an optimistic vision of what can be done to restore the balance. I'd like to say that David Walsh joins me live on the line. David, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad, thank you. In the run up to Christmas, peace, goodwill, and to all men. So this is perhaps a seasonal tome. Let's look at this, because there was obviously one of the buzzwords of the past government and the government we are now under, or you're now in the UK as well, has been saying, we have to have a realignment. We're not returning to the policies of austerity, cost of living crisis, winter fuel bills, etc., etc. Your study or your book looks at what exactly?
So the book is pulling together all the evidence of what the effects of 14 years of austerity policies have been on health and health inequalities in the UK and also in other countries. So an important point to note here is I'm not sure a lot of people, including those in power, politicians, quite understand what the effects have been. So if you think of population health measures like life expectancy and mortality rates, they have improved decade upon decade upon decade upon decade. Indeed, if you look past, the past 100 years in the UK, the only times it's not improved have been times of profound crisis, so pandemics or world wars. Other than that, improvement. In the early 2010s, overall, basically, it stopped improving, it flatlined, but much, much worse than that. In poorer populations across the UK, in every single part of the UK, it went into reverse. So what that meant was people were no longer living longer, they were dying younger and increasing numbers. Some of the figures are astonishing to look at. We lay them out in the book, but they're also laid out in various journal papers and all the research that goes into the book. So in particular cities in the UK, for example, mortality rates among poorer populations, which were coming down year after year after year, basically stop and go into reverse. And it's absolutely shocking. It's stunning in terms of these changes to death rates and all the evidence. And I don't just mean from the stuff that we've been doing, but from different researchers across the UK, across the world, all point very, very clearly now to the effects of those austerity policies that you mentioned, which in combining cuts to the individual income of the poorest in society, so people dependent on social security benefits, and on the services they rely on, because part of austerity was also cuts to local government funding, which impacts on all sorts of vital public social services that people need, particularly people who are in need. In combination, the evidence shows it's had an absolutely horrendous impact on the health of the poorest and the most vulnerable in society. And so we've seen these unprecedented changes to mortality rates and life expectancy, and it's shocking.
I mean, have we sort of been lying ourselves into this sort of false sense of security that we are used to seeing, since the introduction of perhaps of the welfare state, the NHS after the Second World War, that the curve has always been upwards in terms of life expectancy, and perhaps we just assumed that people would, because of the advances made in medical science, etc., that people, early detection of what would have been life ending diseases and the treatment, the part of the care that's given, were we perhaps getting complacent with this? And was this perhaps the thing that shocked you, David?
Well, you have to understand what life expectancy means. So people intuitively think of it as a measure of the health of the population. It's the average age that people are currently living to in any place. But it actually represents much, much more than that. When you look at it over time, it's a broader measure of societal progress. So you've talked about medical advances, but those increases over, 100 years or so also reflect better living conditions that protect the population. Public health success stories like vaccination programs. Within the UK, the establishment of the welfare state, which was a prescription from cradle to grave protection. So all those things have got into that overall improvement. But we would expect the improvement to continue. And the fact that it's just stopped within a couple of years of these policies coming in is absolutely shocking. And if you really want to start quantifying things, then one of the papers that was published showed that if you compare what should have happened with death rates to what did happen, then more people there've been a greater number of excess deaths than there were from the COVID pandemic, for example. It's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of excess deaths. So this is appalling stuff that people need to understand and react to try and bring about some kind of positive change.
Are we looking at it as well as being disproportionate amongst the very poorest in our society against obviously those who have got access to private healthcare and living standards?
Absolutely. So in all the trends that we've shown, and we've done this for, the kind of 4 nations of the UK, we've done it for all the main cities of the UK, it's exactly the same picture. So overall mortality rates, which come down over time, the way that life expectancy goes up, stop coming down within a couple of years of austerity coming in, and they flatline. But in the poorest areas, and I'm not talking about the 1 or 2% poorest areas, I'm talking about, 20% of every place, so a fifth of the whole population of England, mortality rates stop going down and start going up. So it's very, very much about the poorest places and people in those places. And that's a reflection of what austerity was. The cuts to services were the greatest in the poorest areas. And obviously the people most affected by cuts to social security, which incidentally should be a safety net in a civilised society, should be helping people who need help. They were disproportionately affected because obviously they're more dependent on social security help.
But the thing is, we're in a situation now where people are looking at social security in a different way. You only have to look at what the newspapers have been saying over the past 10 years, if not 14 years. The fact that, benefit scroungers, people getting onto benefits that shouldn't, disability items coming in that shouldn't be allowed. Is that a false narrative? I mean, are we getting away from the main fact that people are in need of this, and we don't need more cuts in these services if we are to keep our population healthy?
It's more than a false narrative. It's a pernicious narrative, and it's a baseless narrative. There's been studies done on this. This is, the picture that was painted by a lot of the media at that time, and actually continues to this day, and was echoed, I think, by the government as well, because it suited their agenda, is very much a baseless one. In a civilised society, as I was hinting at there, social security is a safety net to help people in difficult times. It's something not just for the poor, in inverted commas, but something we all as members of society should rely on when our if the occasion comes around that we need help. Within our book, we're presenting a lot of evidence from lots of studies, but we intersperse it with 7 stories of real people who were affected by the policies and how these policies affected them. And every story has been taken to be illustrative of different aspects of austerity. But one of those stories is a woman who was very reluctant to accept any help from the state until illness basically caught up with her and she needed a little bit of help. And at that point, she was treated appallingly, had all sorts of stress created in her life by the system, and died tragically younger than she should have had. So it's very much, social security is there for us all when we need it. And in civilised societies, as I say, it is there. But that safety net has basically been pulled away for large sections of the population.
How much of this is geographical? Because, I mean, we talk about the north-south divide in the UK, in England, but then we've got the difference between the UK, England and Scotland. And people might say, oh, well, your guests from Scotland, pretty from Glasgow, they eat deep-fried Mars bars. I mean, how much of that stereotyping, if you like, about an unhealthy diet being part of the culture did you find in that, Dave? And how much of that can you blow out of the water?
So this isn't about diet. This is about cuts from government which have affected the poorest populations in a number of different ways. In terms of geography, there's been a number of studies published, including by colleagues down at Sheffield University, who've looked exactly at that, the geography of the cuts, the geography of austerity. And it shows very clearly that it's the poorest parts that have been most disproportionately affected. But it's not about diet, I repeat, it's about the cuts to the services that people rely on when they need a bit of help. It's about the cuts to the income of individuals in terms of social security. It's not about diet and all that. And it's quite an unhelpful distraction, I think, from the main point here about the overall impact of these policies and the need to reverse them, to try and reverse the appalling trends in life expectancy. So,
but one of the things you mentioned is the difficulty in getting help when you need it then. And that, is that also an overcoming? I mean, it's not a question of, okay, I need help here, and you go along to your local office and they don't shower you with money. I mean, you talked about the example in the book, because it'd be very easy to have facts and figures, but you're talking about sort of real-time examples, if you like. So, how much of, if you like, distraction from the policies or difficulty in getting those benefits, if you need them, did you find, David, in your study?
So in terms of social security, it's hard to overstate the amount of changes that have been made to the system. Now, bear in mind the UK already, again, this doesn't fit with the media narrative, but the UK already has a very, very low level of social security provision. If you compare with other high income countries, we do not compare well. But the scale of changes have been extraordinary. So austerity was kicked off in 2010 by the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition government. In that first parliament alone, they introduced more than 150 different reforms, 150. And they were cutting levels of social security, and they were cutting eligibility for social security. That was then followed by astonishing number of more reforms over the next 14 years. And in totality, the evidence shows that it's had these overall effects in the population, but also within that, different groups have been particularly affected. So families with children, for example, especially in England, ethnic minority groups, because they tend to be poorer, lone parents, and of course, most perniciously of all, the disabled, because a whole set of reforms were focusing on the disabled. So again, in a civilised society, do you help people who are disabled? Do you help people who are poor and need help? Or do you basically attack them, which is what 14 years of austerity policies does? And I know that sounds quite dramatic, but when you look at the evidence laid out, not just from us, but by, hundreds of studies, that's basically what it shows.
And of course, they have the demonisation of people who need this. The language, scroungers, the language, work shy, that sort of thing. It doesn't help the situation, does it?
And that kind of vitriolic campaign of demonisation, if you like, was very, very successful. If you look at, there are surveys done in the UK in terms of people's attitudes, social attitude surveys, and they show very clearly that over time, the number of people who viewed people on social security benefits negatively increased, because they were all seeing these headlines about skivers and all the rest. The main opposition party at the time, Labour, they also started using the same thing. Rachel Reeves quoted saying, "Oh no, we're not the party of benefits, etc." So it was a kind of a race to the bottom in terms of this horrific language, which just avoids the main point, which is, I say, you should be looking after people in society who need help, not slaughtering them in this way.
And of course, if you make it difficult, and if you objectify these people and make them less than human, you've got the general social aspect. You look at their personal benefits. They're sitting there with their Sky TV, ordering in their pizza, whatever you want to say in their lifestyles. This is why their lifestyles are, they're taking advantage. But B, it has a tremendous impact on the people who are being affected by this. And I mean, in terms of the mental health, in terms of people self-harming, and in some cases taking their own lives, David. I mean, I'm not sure that's something you look at in the survey itself, but that's going to have an impact, isn't it, on the general well-being of a society at its lowest level?
Yeah,
or it's most vulnerable. It's most vulnerable.
But it's also, as I say, a completely false narrative. So if you look, for example, at the biggest increases in poverty over the last 14 years, it's not people who are not working, it's people who are working, but they're not earning enough because of all sorts of issues in the labour market, etc. So in-work poverty has increased massively. So it's not that people are, inverted commas, skiving, they're working and trying to make a living, but it's in an environment where it's quite hard to make ends meet. Things like the cost of living crisis, etc., has all added to that. So I think it's unhelpful to keep repeating things about, I know we are quoting other papers, but skivers or sky dishes or whatever. It's the social security system is there for all of us, not just, inverted commas, those people, as you put it. It's there for all of us, you and me, when we need it. And that's again the whole point of some of the stories we introduce in the book, that it's normal people who were just caught up in a difficult situation. At that time of a difficult situation, they turned to the state for help. And that help was not there. Indeed, the opposite was there. And that's the important thing. It's about trying to understand this, reverse it, and create a social security and a broader welfare system that helps people when they need help.
It's interesting to say about people being working, because we have governments who are trying to be all sexy and saying, oh, they're working in it's the gigger economy, as if that's something that's something that's going to give people a lot of money. But these are people working for delivery things and working on 0-hour contracts and stuff, and that has that again has an impact presumably on the population.
Yeah, precisely. So there's all sorts of issues that are required around employment legislation as well. You're talking about 0-hour contracts, gig economy, etc. I mean, some of these things have been vaguely promised by the new UK government. We need to wait to see what the details are going to be. But it's taking a broader perspective to understand those who are in poverty, including so many of them who are working, and why they're in poverty, and what can be done to address that. The important point about all this also is how poverty impacts on your health. This kind of lies at the heart of this. And there's very, very solid evidence that poverty causes lots of stress. Stress is a risk factor for lots of chronic diseases. Stress causes poor mental health, and again we lay out the evidence in the book about the strong links to poor mental health and then physical health. So at the heart of this, it's about increased levels of poverty, and we need to address that and again help people who are in poverty.
So what are you hoping that people are going to learn? I hope is it a wake up call? I mean, what is the age at the moment in the UK for the average life expectancy, and how has it fallen from its perhaps peak in the 80s and the 90s?
Yeah, well, I don't have that particular figure because it varies across the UK, obviously. Right. So it's different in the 4 different nations. And then within every nation, because the UK is characterised by very, very, very wide health inequalities, it varies massively within nation. It varies massively within every city. We are an enormously unequal society. So it varies hugely. But the main point, as I said, is that overall it stopped improving in every part of the UK and also has gone into reverse in the poorest areas. And it's that we need to address.
So do we need to have a rethink? Do we need to change the language? You need to change the policies more than the language, David, to get things on to get, to re-establish a basic level of decency, I suppose, and have an adult conversation about this.
Absolutely. At the start of this quite depressing conversation, you did talk about being more optimistic at the end. So the final chapter of the book does lay out the policies that are required. It's not rocket science. A lot of it is about reversing what has been done in terms of recreating or creating a social security safety net for people, about investing in services. But the main point about that, and the other evidence we lay out about policy-based recommendations, is that we know what they are. We all know what's required. There's a whole pile of stuff. This would be of no interest to your listeners, but a whole pile of documents published over the last few years in terms of what policies are effective to narrow health inequalities generally in the UK, and what policies are required in terms of reversing the last 14 years. So it's not that we don't know what to do, it's that it requires political will, and it requires, given where most of the powers lie in the UK, it requires the UK government to understand the evidence of what's happened to people on the back of those 14 years of austerity, and to reverse it and introduce new policies that will actually help the population.
The book is called Social Murder, Austerity and Life Expectancy in the UK. It's by Jerry McCartney and David Walsh, who I'm speaking to right now. David, if people want to find out more information about this, where's the best way of finding you? Online? I mean, do you do social media? Where's the best place to find you?
So I'll just say also that we're not making money out of this book before we're accused by your listeners of being hypocrites. So all any of the royalties are going to NHS charities. I avoid social media like the plague. Right. But my co-author Jerry McCartney is on Twitter. You'll be able to find him. If you Google the book, it will take you to the publisher's website where you can see details of it there. I'm at Glasgow University, and so if you Google my name, you'll find me there, and you'll find me within the School of Health and Wellbeing. There's Twitter accounts associated with all these things.
And you'll also be able to order the book via our own virtual bookstore. The book is called Social Murder, Austerity and Life Expectancy. It's by Jerry McCartney and David Walsh, who I'm speaking to today. David, thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. Appreciate it.